New Year, everybody. Week 17 in the NFL. Mark Farzetta, Seth Joyner, Derek Gunn joining you for the JAKIB Media pregame show ahead of the Eagles taking on the Saints. Yet again, we are in this play once again. Eagles win. They clinch the top seed. They clinch the NFC East. Who will be at the helm when it comes to quarterback? All reports, and the Eagles even said that Jalen Hurts is doubtful going into this game, looking like Jalen Hurts will miss his second consecutive week with that shoulder injury. Gardner Minshew will get the start today as the Eagles take on the Saints. Gunner, let's start with you. How serious is this issue with Jalen Hurts? Would he be ready come week 18 if need be?
Yeah, this is more of a precautionary measure. He could play, but I applaud the Eagles for taking the extra measure. Gardner Minshew has more than enough attributes and enough assets around him to beat the Saints today. There's a bigger picture on the horizon when you look at a Jalen Hurts. And even if he doesn't play next week against the Giants, this is a team that's loaded for the playoff run. This is a team that's focused on the playoff run. Obviously, you want to get that home field advantage because, as we saw, take Buffalo, prime example. You look at how Buffalo has yo-yoed up and down from the 1 seed to the 5 seed over the last month. Now they're in control again, and they got to take care of business. This Eagles team, all they do is need to win this one game. But we've seen across the board in the National Football League all season long, always expect the unexpected. This has been the most unpredictable year that I can remember in quite some time. Every week, on an average, there's been 3 to 5 shocker results across the league. You don't take this Saints team lightly. To the point, it's all hands on deck. I just saw a report earlier today that Marshawn Lattimore, who hasn't played for the Saints since October 9th because of an abdomen injury, he's playing today all of a sudden. You look at Chris Olave, who's been having hamstring issues. Oh, he's playing in this game today. It's all hands on deck because the Saints do have a faint hope of getting in the playoffs. They have to run the table and get a little bit of help. But it's the National Football League. It's exactly what the NFL is. Parity late in the season.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. Seth, let's go to Jalen Hurts once again. Precautionary, you just heard it from Gunner right there. Do you think this is a situation that if the Eagles were playing for that top seed today and it was their last chance, if this was week 18, do you think he would be playing in today's game?
I think he would. And we've seen videos of him running around in practice this week, throwing some little short passes around. I think that if they really needed him to go, that he would go. And Gunner, we always agree on everything. The thing I disagree with, they cannot go into next week's game and have Gardner Minshew play next week's game and have Jalen Hurts essentially go 4 to 5 weeks without playing. He must play some football either next week, or I don't know whether they're even going to have him active today, but he needs to be playing. Listen, Gardner Minshew's played well. The 2 games that they've asked him to play in the last 2 years, he's stepped up. He's gotten the job done. They fell a little short last week. But the dynamic of this offense, is built upon the athleticism and the skill set of Jalen Hurts. He can give them the short passing game. Every once in a while, he may be even able, to stretch the field passing the ball, if you get it out of his hands early. But what really makes this offense go is the threat of Jalen Hurts being able to run the football. And when you don't have that there and his ability to scramble and make plays on the move, when you don't have that as a part of that offense, you're missing something. This Saints team, there's a lot of bad blood between, this team and the Philadelphia Eagles team. You go all the way back to 2017 and the comments that Alvin Kamara made, the miracle in Minnesota and them having to come here for the NFC Championships and feeling like, that should have been them instead of Minnesota, and them saying that they would have come to Philly and beat us. You got Jalen Hurts 2 years ago in his first pro start against the New Orleans Saints, and he goes in and wins the game as a rookie against the number 1 ranked defense in the National Football League. And then you throw into the mix, this number 1 draft pick, this year, and what this game means to that positionally. I think that the Eagles are going to get everything that the Saints got today. And they better be checked in, locked and loaded, and ready to go from the jump. Because if you give this team, because they got some players on the defensive side of the ball. They got some guys. Cam Jordan's going to be coming. Demario Davis is going to be coming. And if you give those guys an inkling of belief that they could win this football game, the weather's going to be, 50, 55, almost 60 degrees, prime, great weather. We don't have the advantage of cold weather. They better be locked and loaded and ready to go today and take whatever little bit of fight that this 5-10 or 4-11 team has in them. They better be ready to snatch it from their souls early.
Let's hope that's the case. And obviously, after last week, the Eagles had a record worst day in terms of yards allowed in that game against the Dallas Cowboys, despite a couple of short yardage situations, thanks to turnovers, courtesy of the Philadelphia Eagles offense. Those uncharacteristic turnovers that Nick Sirianni held Nick Sirianni likes to describe them. But Seth, how hungry is this defense going to be to go after the quarterback today? How hungry are they going to be to make that big play and force those turnovers against this Saints offense?
Well, I'll tell you this, there's massive competition going on that defensive line. You got three guys that's got 10+ sacks. One guy that's hovering right there, on the cusp of joining them. And Jonathan Gannon is not going to call the game any differently. I don't believe that he can trust Josiah Scott and Reed Blankenship to the level that he would trust the normal starters that would be in there. When you have Avonte Maddox in there, you saw in the first half what he was willing to chance last week. I don't think he does that with Josiah Scott unless Josiah Scott has some kind of epiphany this week in practice and figured out, where he's supposed to be and he's communicating with everybody back there. Unless you see that, I don't think it's really going to change that much. But they're going to get after Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton runs hot and cold all the time. He can be on fire one game or one half, and he could be ice cold and throw it to you 3 or 4 times the next half. They've got to encourage that right now. I think the one thing that Jonathan Gannon is going to have to do, D-Gun, is he's going to have to get his corners up, and they're going to have to challenge the wide receivers at the line of scrimmage because Andy Dalton will not hold on to the football. No. He's going to go short passing game. He's going to get that ball out 1, 2, 3 and out, 1, 2, 3 and out. He's going to do everything he can not to give this defense the chance to upset the apple cart. And I believe that they're going to call the game that way. So the Eagles are going to have to get up, challenge the wide receivers at the line of scrimmage, be in position to knock some of these quick passes down.
You know what, Seth, how many times have we talked about that throughout the course of this season, and we sit there pulling our hair out, or our nubs in our case, because he allows the DBs to play 7 and 10 yards off the ball. So as much as I agree with you, I don't think we're going to see it. He may try to mix and match a little bit, but I think he's still going to have these guys 5, 7, 8 yards off the ball and allow them to complete stuff underneath. And I think that's a bad recipe for allowing an inferior opponent to think that they can hang with this Eagles team for 60 minutes of football. Now, we don't know to what the severity is of the hamstring injury that has been plaguing Chris Olave, but that young man is a special receiver. If I'm the Saints, I move him right to the slot and test him against Josiah Scott all day and force the Eagles to make some adjustments. They don't have Michael Thomas in their arsenal. There's no Jarvis Landry today. The focus will be on Chris Olave. What will they do to blanket this young man? Reed Blankenship is a good young player, but he still makes mistakes. Josiah Scott is like Jekyll and Hyde. You don't know who's going to show up week in and week out. As weird as it sounds, Josiah Scott has played better football when he's been called upon a few times to start than when he's had to come in and replace somebody due to injury. Well, it looks like today he is going to start. So I'm hoping that helps him settle in and play a much more consistent brand of football. But Seth, we can sit here and beat our heads against the tables all day. I do not expect to see Jonathan Gannon have his Pro Bowl corners come up and play physical against whoever is playing wide receiver for the Saints today.
Well, I think a lot of it too, Mark, is, okay, what's the recipe? You know that Alvin Kamara is more than formidable as a running back, not only running the football, but out of the backfield, okay? So you got to take care of the run to begin with. If you can take care of the run, that means that you don't have to commit as many assets to the box, on 2nd and long and 3rd and long situations. Then the other situations you get yourself into, I think one of the And D-Gun, listen,
Yeah.
he might not want to do it. And I think what happens with Josiah Scott is that Josiah Scott, when he's starting, he gets a full week of practice.
Right.
When you get a full week of practice, you get the communication and, you get the reps and you get everything that you need. So maybe he's a little better under those circumstances. That tells me, that when he's not starting, he's not preparing himself as properly as he needs to be, because you're always just one play away. But, okay, I'll keep an eye on that and see how he does, in a situation where he's starting today. But the other thing that it brings into the mix is, Jonathan Gannon's mindset. Okay, if I've got to commit assets to a Chris Olave in the slot against Josiah, then what does that do to the rest of the secondary? What does that do to the run game? Because now you're at a disadvantage as far as the numbers are concerned in the run game. And coverage-wise, somebody across the board's got to play man-to-man with no help at all.
The thing is, when you look at an Alvin Kamara, his numbers have been down compared to how we've been accustomed to see him playing. Only 717 yards rushing, but he has almost 1,200 yards in total offense, okay? The last two games, all of a sudden the Saints have given Alvin Kamara the football in the running game 20 and 21 times. They've won both of those games. Alvin Kamara, before these two games, had not had 20 carries in a game since week number 3 of the season. Okay, all of a sudden he realized they need to rely on him a lot more for this offense to be effective. And Seth, you were talking about Andy Dalton. There's a reason why Dalton has only been sacked 18 times. That ball's coming out of his hands. Now, the Eagles' defensive front can be effective just by getting pressure on him, forcing him to make decisions a lot sooner. Getting him down on the ground is going to be difficult for a defense that has been averaging 6 sacks a game for the last 4 games. But you don't need to get him down to rattle Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton is not the same quarterback he was 4 or 5 years ago. But he has shown moments this season when he can resort to being that Andy Dalton of 4 or 5 years ago. You don't want to see that Andy Dalton today, even with a depleted receiving core.
Certainly. The other thing that comes into the factor here when it comes to the Eagles defense is how they're going to approach not just Alvin Kamara, but also this Taysom Hill character that seems to give a lot of teams headaches, especially in crunch time. Like last week against the Browns, he's able to come up with a touchdown, help get the Browns back into that game. And then Alvin Kamara gets another touchdown in that game to actually put the Saints over the top with the Browns scoring those 2 touchdowns in the third quarter. They seem to throw a lot of curveballs at defenses. So for me, when it comes to what Jonathan Gannon is going to be doing in this game, I consider this to be a pretty simple, keep it simple, stupid type of game for the Eagles defense. And when it comes to their guys in the middle, like a guy like Trent Edwards, for instance, how are you going to deploy him when it comes to getting after the quarterback if they do decide to do that? Are you going to have him be spying on Hill this entire game? Are you going to have him spying on Kamara this entire game? How are you going to be using those guys in the middle of the line? And also, probably the biggest factor in all this, it's not just Josiah Scott that needs a bounce back week. Kazir White has been playing a pretty good linebacker position for this Eagles team on the outside, and last week had a lot of struggles, was biting and read option plays, was biting on pump fakes from Dak Prescott. He really struggled last week, and if there's one guy other than Josiah Scott that I see that needs to bounce back, it's Kazir White in this game. And I think with the curveballs they can throw from this offense and Andy Dalton being a pretty accurate quarterback and getting rid of the ball quick, you look at a guy like Kazir White that I think Seth needs to jump back in this game.
Well, listen, he's going to have his hands full today because he's going to be the guy on Alvin Kamara in 2nd and long and 3rd and long situations with him coming out of the backfield. D-Gun talked about, that 500-plus yards in receiving that Alvin Kamara has. That's going to be his job. I would caution you, I don't know who it's going to be, but whoever it is on the strong side, whether it's a tight end or they go trips, and whoever that third guy is on the strong side, look for the New Orleans Saints to take a page out of the Dallas Cowboys playbook because they've been putting TJ Edwards in conflict lately. They go trips and they swap the tight end and the wide receiver and put the wide receiver inside and the tight end either in the slot or outside. So even in zone coverages, the task is on TJ Edwards to cover the number 3 receiver. Last week, they just had a field day against it between Blake Jarwin and CeeDee Lamb in zone. They just had a field day against TJ Edwards. But, listen, Kazir White, he's going to have to be the difference maker when it comes to Alvin Kamara, because the Eagles can't afford to commit resources to help him and Josiah Scott. Then it's like pick your poison. As far as Taysom Hill is concerned, listen, I go zero coverage against Taysom Hill, and I just load the box up. You know he's going to run the football. He has thrown some balls this year. I'm not sure how many touchdown passes he's thrown, but I know he's thrown some deep balls and completed them. But there's not very many guys that I'm afraid of in that situation. I take Darius Slay and I put him on Chris Olave, and I move Josiah Scott outside or inside or wherever it is, and just go zero coverage and load the box and say, hey, I need you guys to, make Taysom Hill, throw a good ball. But we're going to bring pressure, and we're going to load the box, and we're going to make him ineffective, because we're going to take every gap across the board and make sure that he doesn't run. And if he does throw, we're going to bring pressure and get after him.
The thing about New Orleans' version of the Wildcat is, with a Taysom Hill back there, it's not just a running scheme. He will step back. He will throw a pass. He's 11 of 17 this year, 2 touchdown passes. They will run like a jet sweep version of the Wildcat as well. They're very creative with their version. Taysom Hill is a phenomenal athlete across the board. You look at most teams that run the Wildcat, they run it with a running back or a wide receiver, so you know it's going to be a running play. But not with Taysom Hill. He is a strong, physical, fast individual that creates a multitude of problems for any defense. So when people say, oh, it's easy to defend the Wildcat, no, it's not, because you don't know what he's going to do, and you don't know what this Saints offensive coordinator has in store. I mean, what has Lane Johnson told us every week for the last month or so? Every time they have faced an opponent, they have seen something when the game unfolds that they did not see in the film room all week long leading up to that game. And I expect more from the Saints. Every coordinator, every head coach has a certain arsenal of plays in his playbook they save specifically for the latter part of a season or in the playoffs if they're fortunate enough to get in the playoffs. With the Saints being in a situation they are right now, if the Saints run the table, as bad as that division is, as bad as their record is, if the Saints run the table and get some help with Carolina beating Tampa today, and then, of course, the Saints get Carolina next week, guess what? The Saints win the NFC South, they're in the playoffs. It's that simple. So they have as much to play for as the Eagles. Now, they don't score a lot of points, but that defense doesn't give up a lot of points. That's going to be an interesting matchup with this Eagles offense.
Yeah, just for the record, the Saints average 20.2 points per game. That's what they score. That's ranked 22nd in the NFL. Their defense ranked 14th in the NFL when it comes to 21.7 points allowed per game. So they're definitely no slouch when it comes to the defense. However, last week against the Dallas Cowboys, the Eagles were taking on a football team that had the most takeaways in the NFL, and it certainly showed in that game, with the Eagles turning the football over 4 times in that game. This time around, the New Orleans Saints just have 11 takeaways on the defensive side of the ball going into it. Turnovers have been a big deciding factor in both losses from the Eagles, both to the Commanders and the Cowboys. Is it a little bit, you can never relax, you can never break focus, but I'm sure that's a little bit of a comforting factor when it comes to how many giveaways you had in the previous week, taking on a defense like this, Gunner, in what the Saints are actually putting out there on the football field, a team that doesn't take the football away.
Well, the Saints are minus 12 in the takeaway giveaway department. And that's been one of the biggest Achilles heels for this team in terms of not being able to find a better measure of success. The Eagles have to get some turnovers. They have to win the turnover battle. They've lost the last 2 turnover battles to Chicago and Dallas. They've given the football up 7 times in the last 2 games. That's unheard of. When it comes to the turnover battle in general, for me, the big key is watch the body language of Miles Sanders today. You look at his body language from last week after he caught that ball up, head down, had to be consoled. You listen to him talk to the media after the game, very distraught over what happened. This is a young man now who has fumbled the ball twice in 2 games. He hadn't fumbled the football all season long. I think it's imperative you get him going early between the tackles against the Saints defense that's giving up 132 yards a game rushing on the ground. Of course, we've said that the last 2 weeks. Look at what happened in Chicago. They ran the ball 33 times. That's a good, healthy dose of running the football, but they only had 112 yards rushing. Following week against Dallas, they ran the football 29 times, only had 87 yards rushing. So obviously defenses are loading the box more and daring them to throw the football. As crazy as that sounds, they're more concerned about controlling the running game than they are the passing game. Oh, by the way, Chicago stayed in that game taking that approach. Dallas found a way to win the game taking that approach. I think the Saints have a better defense personnel-wise than both the Cowboys and the Bears. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Saints try to throw at this offense to keep them in check.
What was let's go back to that for a second. The Saints better defense, better personnel than the Cowboys.
Yes. The Cowboys defense is predicated on a pass rush. They're a sieve against the run, okay? Mm-hmm. You look at the Saints defense. If Marshawn Lattimore is coming back to play, you have Tyrann Mathieu in the back end of that defense. You got a good edge rusher in Kamara Jordan over here, Marcus Davenport on the other side. You have one of the best inside linebackers in the game in Demario Davis. You have another good inside linebacker in Caden Ellis as well. You've got a lot of good talent on the Saints defense. They haven't gotten the notoriety because of the team's lack of success. Do not discount what this Saints, and you have a pretty good defensive coordinator as your head coach, a guy who's highly respected around the league, and Dennis Allen for his defensive prowess. Do not underestimate the capability of this Saints defense.
Well, Seth, now I'm scared. Now I'm a little scared. Now I'm a little scared about this game.
No.
No, but when it comes to the takeaways, that's the biggest thing for me. I mean, that's where the games are won and lost, especially with this Eagles. If there was any poster season for turnovers affecting wins and losses, it would be a 13-2 Philadelphia Eagles 2022-2023 team, of course. Seth, offensively speaking, we'll get in this with John McMullen coming up in just a second, but offensively speaking, from your perspective as a former linebacker, looking at this Eagles offense, Jack Driscoll, I'm sure, is a guy that you guys would want to attack a lot if he's going to be lining up there at the right tackle position. Lane Johnson's he's a Pro Bowler, as we all know. But when it comes to what you need to do to protect Gardner Minshew in this game, will Jack Driscoll, the former fourth-round pick from 2 years ago, be up to the task today?
Well, I mean, he has been thus far. And, you haven't seen, the panic move of moving Jordan Mailata over to the right side and Andre Dillard, to the left side. That move, or the lack thereof, speaks volumes about what they think about Jack Driscoll, opposed to what they think of Andre Dillard. But listen, he's going to get a steady dose of Cam Jordan. Cam Jordan's going to be coming today. There's just no doubt about it. When you see the backup and you can make hay on the backup, they're going to be coming. Now, if Jack can stand up, there won't be any problems. But if he can't stand up, that means that, you're going to have to, commit, some tight end help to him. You're going to have to commit a back to chip to him. So that takes away from a little bit of the creativity and what you want to do protection-wise when you have a weak link and you got to help him out on the edge like that. But listen, it is what it is. And it is of utmost importance that they figure out a way to keep Gardner Minshew clean so he can make good decisions that are unhurried and unpressured in the pocket, because they cannot afford to turn the ball over. Listen, the Saints got four interceptions on the whole season. 4. Okay. Yep. Those 11 turnovers, they got 4 interceptions and 7 calls fumble. That's pretty paltry, for a defense when you talk about how many games that they've already played. With 7 fumbles, Miles is going to have to put 2 hands on the ball until he breaks the line of scrimmage and he's in a situation in the clear where he can run with the ball with one hand. But the more important thing, in my opinion, is making sure that you keep Gardner Minshew clean so that when you want to pass the football, that he's unhurried. Listen, the Saints, the scary thing is, Mark, and you talk about being afraid. When you look at that Dallas defense last week and where they ranked, and this Saints defense and where they ranked, they look similar. Going into last week's game, the Dallas Cowboys defense was ranked number 2. And I think they were ranked 20-something, against the pass. Well, those numbers look eerily similar to, what you have with the Saints. The Saints ranked number 2 in pass defense, 23rd against the run. Okay. So now, what are you going to do? Are you going to take advantage of the fact that you can run the football at this team? or you're going to come out chucking the ball all over the map like you did last week against the Dallas Cowboys. You know, I would say that's the way you go about this. But we know that Nick Sirianni and his staff, that has not been the conventional, you know, thought to do it that way. And if I'm a defensive coordinator, I'm telling my guys, go get the quarterback. We'll worry about the run later on, because if they're not committed to it, then we're not going to commit the resources to it.
All right, so I just got confirmation. It is Jack Driscoll on the right side. It will be Driscoll today on the right side.
Okay.
To me, losing Lane Johnson, as crazy as it sounds, is bigger in this game today than losing Jalen Hurts. Believe it or not. Jack Driscoll is a better run blocker than he is a pass blocker. Okay? If you go back to that Dallas game, the last play of the game where Minshew threw it to the end zone and was game over, you look at how Driscoll got pushed back into Minshew, which altered his throw a little bit. Now, of course, Dallas had a trio of defenders in the end zone, so the probability of completing that pass was slim. But Driscoll is a much better player moving forward than he is setting up to move backwards. That's why I said it's imperative for the Eagles to establish the run. Hit this team between the tackles, hit them in the mouth, control the clock, go down the field, put points on the board. The Saints are not built to play catch-up football. If they stay even with you and get on top of you, they're a much more formidable foe. If you can get up by a double-digit score on the Saints team, they're not this comeback type offense. And so that's why I think it's imperative for them to establish the run. You know, it's funny. We say, well, they didn't run the ball all that well the last 2 weeks. 33 carries and 29 carries is a very good dose of running a football in any game, no matter. They didn't get the results. They've got to find a way to get the results now against this Saints defense. Keep that defense on his heels. Keep them moving backwards. Control that clock. Put points on the board. Make them come out of their comfort zone. Make them come out of their game plan. Whatever their scripted game plan is, make them come out of it and throw the football more. That's where that defense has that Saints offense right where it wants.
Gotcha. Gunner, Seth, let's go to the link right now. We're going to talk to our friend, NFL insider for JAKIB Media and host of Birds 365. He is brought to us, John McMullen, brought to us by Thrive Financial Services. Get the Thrive Financial Service Retirement Playbook. Go to thrivefinancialservices.com. John McMullen, welcome into the show. Hope you had a happy new year. We're going to be starting it off, unfortunately, it looks like without Jalen Hurts or Lane Johnson on the line of scrimmage for the Eagles today. What's the latest on the Eagles injury news?
Yeah, no surprise there, Mark. It isn't going to be, and we knew Lane Johnson was going to be out to the playoffs. Jack Driscoll was pretty clear he's going to be the right tackle. I think that sort of equation may have changed if the Eagles believed that Lane would be out for the entire season. Then I think they would have entertained some other options. But for the short term, and I expect it to be short term, it makes a lot of sense for Jack Driscoll. And, yeah, Jalen Hurts is getting better. I think if the Eagles need the Week 18 game, he'll be able to play in that game. But it was just too soon off a grade 2 sprained SC joint in the shoulder, because there's a risk if you don't let that thing heal. It's where the collarbone and the breastbone sort of meet. You're more susceptible to have an injury, a further injury. So it makes sense that the Eagles are being cautious there. And, you know, the Eagles should be able to win this game at home at Lincoln Financial Field after 3 consecutive road games with Gardner Minshew. I think that's the hope. I think this is the hope. It's a so-called hat and T-shirt game, and you celebrate the division title, the number 1 seed, and get as healthy as possible for the divisional round.
When it comes to – go ahead, Gunner.
Yeah. John, when you look at the way the Eagles should attack this Saints defense, I said a while ago, I think it's imperative to establish the run and work at the kinks that you had the last couple of games in running the football. You ran the football 33 times, 29 times. You didn't get the gargantuan results that we're accustomed to seeing this year. Whatever the problems were in terms of overcoming what defenses are doing, it's imperative to get that corrected today and take this Saints defense out of the game sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and that might be on paper. I think it makes a lot of sense, Derek, in the fact that if you just look at the Saints defensively, they're much better against the pass than versus the run. Well, you do have to realize they don't have the +1 of Jalen Hurts in the running game. That more traditional inside zone didn't work as well in Dallas without Jalen Hurts and the threat of pulling the football. Plus, Miles Sanders is dealing with a knee injury. He missed some time in practice this week, was wearing a brace on his left knee, hopes to ditch it for the game, but he's not 100%. So everybody's a little bit banged up. Maybe he can't handle that typical workload. Then you need more Boston Scott, more Kenny Gainwell. So there could be some issues with that as well. It's going to be interesting to see how the Eagles attack the Saints. They're supposed to get Marshawn Lattimore back, and they haven't had him for a long time. That's one of the best corners of football. That will help them immensely. To me, and I heard you guys talking about it, it's all about those turnovers, man. I mean, this team is really bad, 31st in the league, the Saints, and -12 in turnover ratio. And you think about the Eagles, up to that Washington game, they were +15 in the turnover ratio. They won it in all 8 games up to that point. And since then, it's been the opposite. They've been the worst in the league in turnover ratio. So they have to clean that up. I think if they play a clean game, they might win passing it, they might win throwing it, but they're going to win it. But they have to play a clean game.
John, I like to stay right there on the turnovers and not so much, focus on what the Saints are doing turnover-wise, but, the Eagles. The Eagles led, to your point, the turnover ratio battle right on up until last week. They lose out to Dallas, 4 turnovers to 1, and all of a sudden Dallas has flipped them. Now Dallas, is leading by 3. They're +12. The Eagles are now under double digits for the first time in a while. They're +9. They're number 2 in turnover ratio. What, if anything, did you find out from Nick Sirianni this week about the turnovers? Because the Eagles got 2 losses, and in both of those games, they're averaging 4 turnovers a game.
And I think it's bigger than that. And he was, you don't see, at least, you see Nick get fired up in games on the sidelines, but he's pretty even keeled during the week. But he was pretty angry about the turnovers after that Dallas game. But it goes deeper than that, Seth. If you go back to the Week 10 loss to Washington, right, that's where it all started. As you mentioned, 4 turnovers there, 4 turnovers against Dallas. But they're -6.
I think we lost John's audio there for a second. John, do you have audio up and running? I think we lost John's audio there for a second, unfortunately, but I do want to get this in. The inactives did just come out for the Philadelphia Eagles. It is official that Jalen Hurts is inactive, as is Lane Johnson, as we did know. Marshawn Lattimore, as well as Chris Olave and Pete Werner, are all active today for the Saints. They had some injury issues, especially Lattimore, who was dealing with a knee injury, I believe it was. And I know that Olave was dealing with the hamstring injury, but they are active today against the Eagles. Also, Andres Pete, their left guard, is inactive today. So they're going to be a little banged up on that offensive line. So the Eagles can certainly relate to that. Our thanks to John McMullen. We'll see if we can get him back a little bit later in the show, maybe get his prediction for today's game. We'll be back in a moment with not only our official predictions towards the end of the show, but what this Eagles offense can do against this defense of the New Orleans Saints, who do play aggressive despite the turnovers being a season worst in the NFL. We'll be back in a few here on the JAKIB Media